So let's take a look through some of the top achieving Warhammer 40k lists in 2025 so far. Which armies have good players chosen to take to reach the very tops of enormous tournaments since the last balance update. Hello and welcome back to Auspex Tactics, where today we're looking at some of the strongest army lists in Warhammer 40k, taking a tour through some of the scariest things in the game that have absolutely proved their worth at the highest level. It's now been almost 2 months since the past Warhammer 40k balanced data slate. That came out in mid-December, around about halfway through the run of Dropmas detachments, and between the two updates, 40k has changed really quite a lot. And over the past few weeks, it's certainly been interesting to see what's had some good success in tournaments. For this video, I thought it could be good to round up a few of the best armies that have taken the top spot at a bunch of rather enormous events. For this one, looking at tournaments that had around about 100 players or so in them, I feel like those kind of events are a pretty good way for keeping the majority of the army lists at the top to be both a really optimised list and also someone who absolutely knows to play it superbly, just because you'll have had to come out on top against so many players bringing their best and doing similar. With that in mind, let's take a look through 8 of the very top placing lists. And for a few of the bigger events as well, maybe taking a look at second place as well. Often placing second at one of these is a far more impressive achievement than, say, topping a much smaller tournament. Jumping straight into it though, and starting with an event from the past weekend, this Blood Angels / Space Marines list, depending on how you want to look at it, took the top spot at the Beachhead Brawl, a massive almost 200 player event, with Nicholas Willingale going 6 wins undefeated. This one's one of those slightly unusual lists, with Blood Angels using the Liberator Assault group, but taking no Blood Angels keyword units whatsoever, so they can get the boosted oath of moment. Maybe different ways that you could look at that. I think a few people prefer to think of them as more standard Space Marine style lists, or maybe see them as Blood Angels successor chapter style lists or something, but basically seeing it as the big boosted +1 to wound on the oath of moment target as a reward that's not worth running any Sanguinary Guard or Death Company units in the list, and just go with a bunch of standard scary Space Marine melee that's utterly terrifying between +2 to strength and +1 attack to the charge, red rampage if you need it, and the ability to advance and charge and fall back and charge when you want, all of that being just far more scary and general purpose with boosted oath of moment. This list in particular, like a few Blood Angels lists recently, is a fairly balanced one, a lot of the anti-tank coming from scary range damage, with the troops on the front line able to utterly bully sort of light midfield chaff squads. There's a mighty battery of guns in the backfield with 3 ballistas dreadnoughts and 3 predator destructors with las cannon sponsons, all cheap but effective gun threats. They can absolutely threaten tough stuff with the las cannons, but certainly aren't useless against infantry either. It seems to guide the way for those. There's also a Storm Speeder Hammer Strike, so you can strip cover from one unit that you want to focus your battery of guns on. And there's also not 1 but 2 units of incursors here, which is just all round efficient in this kind of army, both giving their big +1 to hit against one target marked for the vehicles, but also just generally really quite punchy in their own right with those AP1 combat knives now. And on the charge just in themselves, they can absolutely wipe out a lot of lighter infantry. Otherwise, for the actual Blood Angels style melee bit of the list, there's a captain with Power Fist and Plasma Pistol. He takes Speed of the Primarch, which is the one that has fights first once per game, so I guess he'll be going with some Assault Intercessors, likely not a unit that you want to mess with there. And there's also a Juditheer with Gift of Foresight, once per battle round being able to change a hit, wound or saving throw into a 6, which is all rather nasty with his Executioner Greatblade, particularly with the Blood Angels buffs on top of that. Looks like he'd be leading another unit of Assault Intercessors as well, and one of those jumps in and impulsor to get them from A to B. Otherwise, there's a 3rd unit of Assault Intercessors, again just very cheap, blendy and dangerous in this. 3 units of Jump Intercessors, which are great secondary objective units, and between their mortal wounds and damage buffs in general can still be a big threat on the charge. 1 unit of Infiltrators that could deny deep strike in the backfield, and 1 unit of Scouts with a missile and combat knives and chainsword. Nice, cheap and expendable on the front line and can return to reserve. Overall, it's certainly pretty scary stuff. A load of efficient gun turrets to win firefights, and then melee units that mean that you can't really afford just to push up too recklessly. I do perhaps have a feeling that Games Workshop might restrict this kind of army from being able to use the boosted oath of moment in the future at some point though. I feel like disincentivizing the use of the Blood Angels unique units is unlikely to be really what they were going for. Next up, in a look at the massive tournament winners, we've got a Tyranid entry. This one's a Vanguard Onslaught by Sebastian Geoffrion, who used it to take first at a tournament called Grand Tournoi 40k, an event of just under 100 players. I feel like Tyranids have been a fairly well balanced faction post-update. Win rates are around about the 50% mark, and occasionally getting some good success at tournaments, though not all that often. Kind of cool to see them top a big tournament like this. And the detachment being used is Vanguard Onslaughts, so the one that's building around those Vanguard Invader organisms, allowing them to advance and charge and fall back and charge, plus having some nice disruption stratagems like turning off enemy shooting, particularly to lone operatives where you can only shoot them within 6 inches, reactive moves which are always nice to have, and return to reserve. Between all that, being an army that's really quite tricky to get to grips with and can make some very long charges. Perhaps one of the biggest features of this army are a whole bunch of Gene Stealers and melee Tyranid warriors led by winged primes who can confirm them the keyword, all of which would just be fantastically dangerous, particularly to enemy infantry, but there's enough attacks there with devastating wounds or twin links that will mean that they'll shave a whole load of damage off even tougher stuff as well. Very scary with the potential of how fast they could get across the board and into melee as well. Otherwise, there's a good amount of lone operatives, Death Leaper who's nice to skirmish on the midboard, a single Lictor that could rapid ingress if desired, and 2 Neuro Lictors that could both mess around with enemy scoring and also make certain units easier to kill within range. The +1 to wound is quite nice for the lower strength of the Vanguard Invaders. There's also a Winged Hive Tyrant, who could be a nice one to turn off long range shooting to. He gets the Disruptive Hunting Grounds enhancement, potentially meaning that enemies that turn up might be battle shocked, so might be unable to do objectives and things, or potentially not use stratagems if they fail. Otherwise, there's 2 units of 10 Hormagaunts, very fast moving objective control units, 10 Gargoyles with all their movement tricks and potentially deep striking, 1 Biovore to sit in the home field and throw spore mines around the board, which could screen out areas as needed, or occasionally be thrown to score secondaries, and a unit of 3 Raveners with the thoracic bioweapons. They're able to return to reserve as well and pop up in places unexpectedly. Overall, definitely a whole bunch of sneaky Tyranids there. Lots of disruption units that I feel like it'd take an annoyingly long time to clear, perhaps too long before they've run away with all the points, paired up with a whole load of threats that you really can't ignore with those Gene Stealer units and the Tyranid warriors. Cool to see the Tyranids take down such a big event in any case. Before we move on, I'll just give a quick shout out to today's video sponsor in Baron of Dice, and they're a US based maker of dice, targeting the higher end of the market with big chunky custom faction dice, and when they made some custom merch dice for the channel they asked to sponsor a few videos as well. They do have an absolutely vast amount of dice designs in their collections, a whole bunch of ones that could potentially fit in with various different factions, both from Warhammer, or could be applicable to all sorts of other games out there. In general, they're considered to be pretty good quality from reviews I've seen. I was certainly very happy with the ones with the channel logo on. For a set of 25 of them, their typical prices are $32 or £29. They're based in the USA, so a little bit cheaper on the shipping within there as opposed to all over the world. If you did want to pick up anything at all, there's a code Auspex that can get you 5% off if you order with that. These are the channel logo dice as well, which they still have in stock. I'll also leave them links down in the video description below if you'd like some nice logo dice. I was quite pleased with how they came out with the little bit of green in the Auspex symbol. In any case, feel free to check them out, there'll be links down in the video description below, and thanks to them for sponsoring the video. Next up, we've got not 1 but 2 lists from the Demons of Slaanesh, the Legion of Excess perhaps being one of the very strongest and scariest armies in Warhammer 40k right now, combining the massive speed that most of the datasheets have with giving them kind of ludicrous damage buffs, provided you can coordinate it so that your units aren't slamming into something that hits you back too hard in melee. 4 rerolls to hit and wound can be absolutely brutal. Plus they have a few more nice tricks as well, such as being able to walk through walls with Keepers of Secrets, an ability to bounce damage from one unit to another if it's just absolutely vital that one thing lives, and an option to deal a whole bunch of mortal wound impact hits as well, in a sort of similar stratagem to Tank Shock. With all those buffs on the go, basically anything Slaanesh is really quite viable here, and I feel like I've certainly seen armies that go heavy on one unit type or another. Perhaps Fiends being the most common thing to see in big numbers. The biggest win for the Legion of Excess was this one, I believe, by Will Whittaker, first at the Nottingham Super Major, going 7-0 at a truly massive tournament of almost 400 players. In this one there's a couple of Keepers of Secrets, one with the False Majesty aura, the one that gives you a +1 to wound for other Slaanesh units nearby. They're big and tough enough that they'll probably be able to take some damage before hitting really hard, and with their mid-strength profiles and rerolls to hit and wound, they're going to be a huge threat against literally anything. Otherwise there's a Torment Bringer on a Chariot for some nice buffs, Celeste with the ability to get up once they've been taken down, and again a bunch of scary general purpose attacks. The Mask is a nice lone operative, and a Transweaver that could buff some Demonettes. Speaking of which, there's one unit of those, a unit of 10 Plague Bearers for some sticky objectives, 2 squads of Seekers, 1 unit of 10 and 1 unit of 5. They can do scout things and potentially tie things up right from turn 1. And then finally, as perhaps the big damage powerhouses of the list, are the Fiends of Slaanesh, 2 units of 6 and 1 unit of 3. Again, they've got enough wounds that they're going to be able to take a little bit of chip damage and activate those rerolls, which is absolutely brutal on their mass AP2 damage 2 attacks with devastating wounds. Overall, it's all very scary stuff. You would need to still make sure that the units don't take too much damage too early, as they're not really all that durable for the cost. And the armies might struggle a fair bit more against more dedicated melee things where they can't afford to fight seconds. In general though, Legion of Excess Demons do seem to be one of the scariest things in 40k right now. Perhaps to kind of underline that, they feature in this video not once but twice it would seem, as it seems that a Gonzalo de la Moneda used this to take first at a great big 90-old played event called Open Talavera. And this one definitely doing a fair bit differently. Perhaps the biggest change will be swapping out a bunch of the Fiends and taking 2 Slaanesh Soul Grinders instead. Again, 40 rolls to hit and wound are going to be absolutely monstrous on them, and they'll certainly take down tough stuff. There's more Demonettes here as well, with 3 units of those and only 2 units of 3 Fiends. Otherwise, there's fairly similar special characters. This one looks like it's got the Contorted Epitome, which could be good to soak mortal wound damage, quite nice for the bounce damage stratagem. And one of the Keepers of Secrets takes Soul Glutton this time round, the one that can heal them a bit. All very scary indeed. Next up, we've got a whole load of boys, and despite the Orc Tactical Brigade clearly being the one that's on top for the Greenskins at the moment, it looks like their single biggest tournament win was this one by a Joel Davis, who used it to take first at Denver Fight Club January Open with 6 wins to no losses at an 86 player event. Green Tide is the Horde Orc army build. It gives your boys invulnerable saves even outside of the war, and has a whole bunch of stratagems that are really quite helpful to support a Horde army. There's one just to generate some more boys with D3+2 coming back, a nice one to make longer charges far easier, a reroll wounds one, and a surge move. Overall, just a lot of stuff to make basic mobs of boys extra scary. For the boys themselves, it looks like it's 3 units of 20 of them and then 1 of 10. I'd guess the big blocks of 20 would largely be going with a War Boss and a Pain Boy. That'd give them a 5+ Feel No Pain, the Hurty Syringe which can do a lot of damage against elite infantry, and the War Boss to add a lot more melee might. One of the bosses takes Bloodthirsty Belligerent to reroll advances and charges. There is also a Weird Boy and that small unit of 10 as well. Not 100% sure on the character attachment. I guess the Weird Boy could go with a smaller squad perhaps, though it could both be with a bigger squad or jumping around solo as well to do secondaries. Both of those could work fine too. Otherwise, to provide some extra scary muscle as well, there's also Ghazghkull Thracker. He's massively dangerous against tanks and monsters, and gives some nice buffs like lethal hits with Makari to boys nearby. He's running with a couple of Mega Knobs, just enough to activate his big rerolls. There's Boss Snickrotch for a nice lone operative secondary doer. 1 unit of Gretchen, which will be nice to farm some command points, and then 2 units of 10 Flash Gits, which I'd guess are riding in those 2 trucks there. Again, just an all-round efficient unit to be able to take out enemy infantry in particular. Massive damage to shooting, combined with some unusually effective melee for a shooting unit, given that they're orcs and hit hard. I feel like while there's a lot of incidental anti-infantry stuff in 40k, I guess that not too many people are really expecting Horde lists at the moment. I'm really cool to see that Horde-style orcs can still have success at the highest levels of the game. They've certainly got the tough bodies and objective control to absolutely dominate on primary early on. It might be a bit of a race against time for the opponents to clear out all those boys and start scoring in a big way on the later turns, if they can even manage to catch up. Next up, we've got a Force of the Unforgiven, and this Dark Angels list by Zachary Morales used it to take first at the Glass City GT, one of the first big tournaments of 2025, going 5-0 against a field of 97 players. Vanguard is definitely a different take on Dark Angels. Generally, most people have been using Gladius Task Force still, and a hefty chunk using Raven Wing with either Company of Hunters or Stormlance, so definitely fun to see a different take here. Vanguard is the Space Marine detachment that can give you some stealth and cover to defend against ranged things, and has some nice support stratagems like Return to Reserve, often used on scary Centurions as it is here. Plus other good stuff like reactive moves and stratagems to buff your shooting. Another thing that the detachment can do is an infiltrate unit, and here there's a Terminator Librarian with Blade Driven Deep. They're running with a unit of Deathwing Knights, able to infiltrate into the midboard and give your opponents a huge problem unit that's really quite hard to take down, likely right on an objective or even squaring up for a first turn charge if they want to. Otherwise for the list, it's really quite a nice balanced Dark Angels list. Grandmaster Azrael, who looks like he's running with a unit of Inner Circle Companions. They'll like his 4+ invulnerable save, his sustained hits, and everything will enjoy his command points. There's a tech marine running with a bunch of vehicles, 2 predator destructors with las cannons and 2 vindicators, so some very big hitting fire support there. There's a unit of devastator centurions, as there often is in ultra-range vanguard, usually using Uriel Ventris. This will still allow them to redeploy and walk on from the sides of the board, so those las cannons and missiles shouldn't be without a target. There's 2 units of jump intercessors, which can be quite nice for doing secondary objectives, and then a couple of units of scouts as well. Good to put more bodies for doing actions and board control in the mid-board, and they can return to reserve and have some boosted stratagem options here as well. Overall, a pretty fun list. Quite fun to see such a balanced army do well. Next up, and it seems like we're not quite done with the demons. I feel like in general the vast majority of their hype has broadly been on the Legion of Excess, but the other Grotmist detachments have all been doing rather well as well. It seems that they've been getting some fairly solid performances almost no matter what you pick, including small numbers of people both making the Plague Legion and the Scintillating Legion work. The Scintillating Legion Chaos Demons one is the Tzeentch one, and it looks like Matt Morrisoli used it to take first at Uprising Adelaide, going 8 victories with no defeats at a big 180 player tournament. The Scintillating Legion is the all rather chaotic Tzeentch one, where you can basically ping rerolls back and forth between yourself and your opponent if you don't need those flux tokens to feed into stratagems. Beyond that, it can make one Demon Prince incredibly fighty. There's a Winged Demon Prince here with the Neverblade, which just gives you a big all-around melee boost here. One option to buff flamer shooting in really quite a big way, though it does cost 2 command points and a flux token potentially. Then maybe one of the most interesting stratagems is the return to reserve one, with a 1 command point delirium on mage, allowing you to pull units from the board. And what's kind of unusual about this one is that you can do it even when engaged in melee, and potentially can even do it to 2 units as well if you spend a flux token. That was quite a big one for basically allowing the opponent to charge your units, and your magical firepower essentially just gets to redeploy and take up new targets. The Demons of Tzeentch aren't really going to be pinned down in this one. For the units taken, there's a Lord of Change with Infernal Puppeteer. He can draw line of sight through different demons and hit them with a bunch of magical firepower while staying fairly safe if he wants to. Kairos Fate Weaver, which has a little bit of indirect damage, plus some command point farming and stratagem debuffing abilities. The Scary Beatstick Prince with the Neverblade. He does have a stratagem to walk through walls if he needs to. 2 units of Pink Horrors, which will be great to go off objectives, having a whole load of wounds with their split rules. 2 units of 6 Flamers, which are pretty nice Tzeentch units for their Overwatch, and as mentioned in this one, their shooting can get far scarier. An extra +3 strength and extra AP -1 if they really need to barbecue something. 2 Burning Chariots for maybe some slightly more expendable magical firepower threat. A unit of 10 Plague Bearers to sticky some objectives. And then it's kind of fun to see the Screamers on the board in a big way here. 1 big unit of 6 of them, and then 2 units of 3. They were one of the units that Games Workshop changed around quite a bit last time round, giving their melee, anti-monster and anti-vehicle, so a squad of 6 of them is going to be quite a big threat to most things out there, and they can move very, very fast. Overall pretty cool stuff. I must admit though, I feel like this one might be a bit more of a testament to player skill. There aren't really a ton of people out there using the Tzeentch detachment right now compared with the rest, and I feel like people who might be a bit less good with movement and Overwatch and indirect fire shenanigans in 40k might not do quite so well with this one. Finally, for the big main actual tournament topping list of the video, you couldn't really have a big tournament video without talking about the Las Vegas Open, which as we looked at as it happened was won by Deathwatch, played by Mark Hertel, with his Deathwatch taking 10 victories along the way at the big crazy over 1,000 player grand tournament. The Deathwatch made their return as a 40k full faction in the not too distant past, getting their new version of the Black Spear Task Force back with its successive damage buffs turn on turn, sustained hits and lethal hits for your 2 biggest ones, and then the ability to flex those mission tactics when you need them, returning units to reserve to teleport down again, which is just enormously scary with the big hitting shooting that the kill teams can put out, and also their special issue ammunition stratagems, which again are far more impactful. Now the Primaris kill team shooting is actually genuinely scary. His victorious list is almost entirely Deathwatch kill team infantry datasheets, a Gravis captain leading the chunky Indomitor kill team in the Gravis armour, taking 3 Flamestorm aggressors and 3 eradicators, and the captain has the Tome of Exoclades as well, so that's 2 Oath moments on 1 turn when you need it. Pretty terrifying shooting coming out of them. There's a Talon Strike kill team with 5 Bolter Inceptors that get the extra AP when they drop, 20 Deathwatch veterans in total, 1 squad of 10 and 2 squads of 5, taking the nice frag cannons and heavy thunderhammers, 1 squad led by the Judiciar with the Thief of Secrets, giving you an incredibly fighting melee character that'll also be fighting first, and another with the Watchmaster for the advance and charge and the discounted stratagems. There's 2 Rhinos to get the kill team units from A to B where they need it. 2 units of Deathwatch Terminators with their triple Cyclone missile launchers. Again, they can take these special issue ammo stratagems when needed, so could hit extra hard if they wanted to. A Combi Lieutenant for some actions and scoring, plus a Storm Speeder Thunderstrike for marking 1 unit for a +1 to wound. Very nice for a bunch of mid-strength firepower like a bunch of these things have. Obviously goes without saying though that winning an event of this sort of a caliber needs a crazy amount of player skill, particularly with an army where you need to make really big decisions with those massive 10-man units and where they go. Deathwatch certainly are looking like one of the stronger factions in 40k right now though still. Lastly, I thought we could take a look at just a trio of runners-up from the bigger ones of those events, maybe going through a little bit quicker. There was also a Deathwatch list by Callum German, who used it to take second at Uprising Adelaide. Certainly some similarities, but some differences here. This one has a big unit of Devastator Centurions, again nice for that return to reserve stratagem, and otherwise going heavy on the Indomitor kill teams, taking a Spectrus kill team that looks like it's joined by the Phobos Lieutenant, I guess, who's got the Beacon Angelus to allow them to deep strike and rapid ingress. I suspect the Phobos Librarian would go with the Infiltrators. Otherwise it's the Gravis Captain with the Thief of Secrets this time for a very fighty character in one of those Indomitor teams. Just the 1 unit of Deathwatch Veterans this time, 5 Intercessors, 10 Jump Intercessors and a Calidus Assassin too. The run-up at the LVO was Ben Neal's Ultramarine Vanguard Spearhead. This one perhaps a more tried and tested Ultramarines Vanguard with Uriel Ventris and Marnius Calgar. Lots of Centurions in this list it would seem, given that there's another unit of 6 of them there with missiles and las cannon being warped around the board and returning to reserve with deep strike from Ventris. Ventris and Calgar each seem to go with some company heroes, Ventris' squad with an Impulsor. There's a Combi Weapon Lieutenant with a Command Point debuff aura, a Captain with a jump pack with the Ghost Weave Cloak, that makes him a lone operative, some Eradicators for some heavy hitting anti-tank, a whole bunch of Inceptors for returning to reserve and striking at targets over and again when they want to, and some Infiltrators and Scouts for some objective grabbing and board control. Finally, it looks like the Guard had a good day with Bridgehead Strike at the Beachhead Brawl. This list by Martin Cooper going 6 wins to no losses, so only behind the winner on points. Bridgehead Strike being the sign support one, which allows you to get some big damage buffs when they come into reserve, and also return to reserve, and a bunch of other handy tricks. There's 3 Tempestus command squads that lead a bunch of Scions here. 1 unit of 10 and then 3 units of 5. Their special weapon fire can be seriously scary here, and particularly with the opportunity to close range drop and pay a command point to drop somewhere outside of 6 inches if it helps get them into their drop zone targets. Otherwise there's Gaunt's Ghost to return to reserve and do secondaries around the board. Ursula Creed looking like she's ordering a bunch of mortars for some accurate firepower with B-roll ones. They'll be clearing out some chaff and screens there. 2 units of Kaschan Jungle Fighters for some objective grabbing and actions. 2 units of infantry squads, I guess one of which will join Creed. Again, they can chip in some mortars as well. 2 tank commanders with 2 Lehman Russ battle tanks, providing some big heavy firepower to take down some tougher targets. They can advance and shoot in this detachment as well, which doesn't hurt for a command point. And then finally a big squad of Tempestus Aquilons, a nice close range drop option that can use a bunch of the detachment synergies, even if they don't do quite as much damage as the Scions do normally. In any case though, I'll leave that one there for now. Let me know your thoughts as to the army list down in the comments below. Look forward to hearing your takes on the factions right now, or any other insights I might have missed when skimming over these. As mentioned, feel free to check out Baron of Dice if you'd like some fancy faction dice for your army. There'll be links down in the video description, and a big thank you to them for sponsoring the video. Feel free to subscribe to Auspex Tactics if you'd like to see more like this. I'll certainly keep the regular 40k videos coming, and if you'd like to support the channel, I do have a Patreon page linked down in the video description, so feel free to check that out if you like. There are a few benefits such as automatic entry into the prize giveaways. In any case though, a massive thank you for listening, and I'll hope to see you guys next time.